If you're shopping for a new GPU right now, should you go AMD or Nvidia? That's what we're going to try to answer today. The RX 9070 and 9070 XT did exactly what we thought they were going to do, and that's upset the mid-tier market by punching pretty evenly and sometimes even exceeding the performance of Nvidia's recent offerings. And they came in with more initial supply and a lighter price point, but we'll also take a look at the secondary market to see how scalper pricing has affected purchase advice. Diving right into the charts today, you can see that at 4K, the RX 9070 beats the 5070 almost always in my 12-game test spread. Dying Light 2, it falls just a couple steps behind, and Black Myth Wukong is pretty much a tie. The most head-scratching win was Black Ops 6. Understand this is a basic preset, or what I use to make the most frames for competitive FPS. I did double-check these numbers, and all the runs were 100% GPU limited, no CPU limiting at all on the 9800 X3D, and the VRAM wasn't even close to being full. So I can't call it, but for whatever reason, AMD absolutely smokes in this game. Moving to 1440p, it's a very similar situation, but this time Dying Light 2 is the only clear win for Nvidia, with the 9070 pulling away in Wukong. And do keep in mind too that all these benches are done usually one step below the highest preset, and I'm not running any ray tracing or upscaling unless it's something I can't turn off in the game. With these being mid-tier cards, I did want to see what 1080p performance looked like, and both these cards absolutely rip at 1080p. There's plenty of headroom here to increase the detail level and turn up the eye candy, particularly on older titles. It really shows just how demanding Wukong is. Pricing on the RTX 5070 will run you anywhere from $549 to $740 at retail, and secondary market at the time of this video is more like $650 to $870. This is a Founders Edition card, and these are traditionally a lot harder to get. My favorite thing about this is how they kept the overall cooler design, but it just looks like a tiny little bro version of the 5080. The RX 9070 I have here is the Prime from Asus, and it runs $655 new. The range on new is anywhere from $549 to $729, and the secondary market is more like $750 to $900. So word seems to be out that the 9070 is preferred over the 5070, and I think the charts back that up. Now, native rendering alone isn't the end-all be-all. When we figure in ray tracing performance and AI upscaling and little quality of life features that exist on both sides, it could change the conversation for some users, so we will dig into that stuff a little later. For now, here's what it looks like at 4K between the 5070 Ti and the 9070 XT. I don't know about you, but these naming schemes being so close together this time around gives me a headache. It's going to be a miracle if I can get through this video without mixing these up. Now, this is a way more interesting fight. If we call anything a 3% variance or less a tie, then they tie in like 7 of these titles. Nvidia takes 4 and AMD takes 1 clear, so at least in my 12-game spread, in native rendering, 4K performance is very close. At 1440p, we have 4 ties. Nvidia with 3 wins, AMD with 5 wins. Again, pretty neck and neck. Really impressive 1440p performance from both cards. These make great 1440p cards if you're not into scaling. And for these two cards, I didn't bother with 1080p because the base cards were already crushing it. And the pricing between these two cards is where things get way more interesting. The RX 9070 XT new goes for about $599 and upwards of $900 for the more premium models. The one I have here is a Tough Gaming OC from Asus. It's a massive card, it'll get you for $799. I should point out that the AMD cards are using standard 8-pin connectors versus the 16-pin connector that's been problematic on the Nvidia side, 3 in the case of this Tough Gaming OC. It's a really nice looking card. My only caution with the Tough Gaming cards is that they're unlikely to fit in small form factor builds where their prime model cards usually will. Always be sure to measure before you order. I've had that literally come down to 1 millimeter in some cases. So the MSRP variance on the 9070 versus the XT is $50, and here's how they compare in 4K. The orange bar overlay is the 9070 performance, so we're at a 13% uplift between the two. Similar story at 1440p, we're gaining about 11% between the 9070 and the XT. That seems like a no-brainer for an extra $50. On the secondary or scalper market, we're looking at around $800 to $1,400 depending on the original price. Now, the pricing on the 5070 Ti starts at $749, $150 more than the 9070 XT, and goes up to about $1,000. The one I have here for testing is an Asus Prime provided by Nvidia. It's an MSRP card at $749. The secondary market sees anywhere from $1,000 to $2,000 with a handful of even more obscenely priced listings. There's a huge spread, but on average you can expect to pay around $1,100 for an MSRP card. There's also been a lot of rumors out there about price hikes on both sides, or MSRP cards just not being restocked or being restocked in very low quantity, but as far as I can tell so far, those are just rumors. So if we're talking purely native rendering for gaming and purely price point, the smart money clearly goes to AMD, whether you're buying new or from an auction site, and more specifically to the 9070 XT. Even with scalpers in the mix, I have to applaud the fact that AMD brought home a card that stands and punches with the 5070 Ti for $150 less, but there's still more to this conversation. Full disclosure, I don't have a lot of experience on the AMD side when it comes to GPUs. I've just always gone Nvidia, not out of any weird sense of brand loyalty. It just seemed to me that more times than not, they made the fastest card on the market. The concept of bang for buck has always been kind of lost on me because I always felt like I had to have the fastest. Not that I'm rich by any stretch, I'm just financially irresponsible when it comes to things I'm passionate about. So the first big thing is ray tracing. This is used for rendering light in scenes and creating really accurate reflections. Nvidia pioneered the use of real-time ray tracing in games. RTX literally stands for Ray Tracing Texel Extreme. So it stands to reason that Nvidia cards would perform better when you turn this on. The thing about ray tracing though is that it can be both extremely demanding and completely overrated depending on how it's implemented. The reason why Cyberpunk, a game that's now more than 4 years old, gets trotted out every time ray tracing gets brought up is because that title is seemingly a sandbox designed to showcase all of Nvidia's latest tech. Truth told, it's a spectacular demonstration of ray tracing done right. Their latest, path tracing, is insane. But that's not the case in all games, not by a long shot. Sometimes you can barely tell it's on, sometimes it's the same but different, and sometimes it's just worse. But every time it comes with a substantial performance hit. Like we saw in Hogwarts Legacy, ray tracing actually makes a lot of stuff look weird with a shimmery overlay of what's supposed to be the sun reflecting off things, but it's more distracting than it is nice to look at. In Dying Light 2, I really prefer the look of the ray trace presentation both in day and night scenes, but it doesn't really punch in the low settings. It needs to be cranked up, and that's where we see those big performance hits. The 5070 Ti at 4K averages 103 FPS with no ray tracing. Low gives us 91 or a 12% knock, but Ultra cuts us all the way down to 48 FPS. That's a 53% performance hit. The 9070 XT puts up 95 FPS with no ray tracing. Low knocks us all the way down to 75, a 17% hit, and Ultra goes to 41 FPS, a 57% hit. We see a similar pattern in Black Myth Wukong with a pretty sizable hit just turning it on in the first place, and then another major hit moving to very high. In Cyberpunk, you get hit hard at medium, Ultra only marginally, and then Overdrive, which uses path tracing, absolutely murders both these cards. The 9070 XT specifically saw an average of only 0.8 FPS or 53 frames per minute. Even ignoring those hilarious path tracing results, the Nvidia side wins all of these ray tracing performance comparisons, sometimes by barely anything and sometimes by a notable margin. The big question though is it worth the performance trade-off at all? Like I said, that worth it factor varies a lot by game, and if you want to see a deep dive into how different games implement ray tracing and whether it's worth the trade-off or not, I'll link a really incredible video from Hardware Unboxed. So if you do decide you want to run ray tracing and you want to do it at 4K, especially cranked up, you're definitely going to need to use some AI upscaling. This is not the same thing as AI frame gen. This is rendering at a lower resolution, then using AI to upscale. On the Nvidia side, it's under the DLSS suite, and on AMD, it's called FSR. This is something that, being primarily an Nvidia user, around the time DLSS 3 came out, I just turned it on and let it rip. And now digging more into the AMD side, I guess this is something that I took for granted. Black Myth Wukong was the first time I'd seen FSR 2 in action, and yikes, it basically turns the surface of the water into like a watercolor painting, not actual water. I do understand that there's a mod out there to run FSR 3.1 with this game, but point being, on the DLSS 3 side, you don't have to Google a solution. You just run the game and there's no problem to fix in the first place. I don't really find FSR 3.1 to be all that impressive versus DLSS 3, and I'm not talking about little stuff that you have to pixel peep for, even edge stability stuff like this, which most of the time I'm happy to overlook at 4K. I'm talking about super obvious stuff that jumps out at you while you're playing. It especially struggles with things like these waterfalls here and anything that involves particles. These new AMD cards though are using FSR 4 either natively or through an override in the Adrenalin software. In order to use FSR 4, the game has to currently support FSR 3.1, it has to be whitelisted by AMD, and you have to be on these newest cards with RDNA 4. Currently, the older AMD cards do not support FSR 4. The quality of DLSS 3 versus FSR 4 versus DLSS 4 varies game to game, but it seems like it's pretty commonly accepted that FSR 4 and DLSS 3 punch pretty close, with FSR 4 coming out on top more times than not. It's pretty rare that FSR 4 will just outright beat DLSS 4 though. And that's in the titles that are currently supported. AMD is currently only showing 36 titles with support for FSR 4. On the Nvidia side, DLSS 4 works retro all the way back to the 20 series cards, and there's currently over 100 games supported. And I have heard about this Optiscaler mod that on the AMD side supposedly allows you to inject FSR 4 into any game. I'm currently digging into that a little deeper to see what that looks like. So even after all that, we're just barely scratching the surface of the scaling conversation. There's a lot to take in there, but the big thing is that AMD seems like they've made some really big strides in their upscaler performance. Their games list though is still pretty light, at least without modding. Nvidia still seems like they're mostly leading the industry in this tech, creating like a leapfrog relationship with AMD, where even now with AMD starting to catch up in this area, Nvidia's already moved to a better upscaling model called Transformer. So really, if you always want the latest tech in this area, Nvidia is where you want to be. It is worth saying too that while both sides currently offer frame gen, DLSS 4 offers multi-frame gen for the 50 series. I haven't been super wowed by this at 4K on this tier of card. I did like it on the 5080 in very specific cases, and I've not yet seen it on the 5090. So that's a pretty encompassing look at the gaming side. If the pricing was the same and the public sentiment of Nvidia was a little better, I would say Nvidia is a no-brainer. Based on the price difference between the 9070 XT and the 5070 Ti, I think there's more of a decision to mull over there, and it probably comes down to whether the titles you mainly play are supported by FSR4 or not. As far as supporting software goes, there's pretty good feature parity on both sides. Like, I use Shadowplay on Nvidia to record gameplay a lot, and I found that to be equally as easy and yield equal quality on the AMD side. For every software feature Nvidia has, like Reflex, AMD has an answer for that, but it still feels like Nvidia is leading with AMD playing catch-up. Now, outside of gaming, I can't really speak to AI workloads, but for video editing, Nvidia takes it clear, as you can see here in the Puget bench for DaVinci Resolve. In Blender benchmarks, the new Nvidia cards absolutely smoke the AMD cards, offering almost 2.5 times the performance in Blender 4.4. And that specific test, believe it or not, was provided by AMD in their reviewer's guide. So as far as conclusions, it's pretty straightforward. I didn't spend a lot of time in this video talking about the 5070 and the 9070 base cards from a value standpoint, and that's not on accident. The 5070 is a dog, especially at secondary market pricing. The lesser VRAM and single NVENC encoder just doesn't do it for me, and the 9070 just beats it unless you're really into Nvidia specific tech. The pricing on the 9070 is weird to me because for only $50 more to get to the XT, why would you bother? I love the pricing on the 9070 XT, but if anything, it just makes the pricing on the 9070 feel like it's too high for what it is. The battle really comes down to the 9070 XT and the 5070 Ti. I love what AMD is doing here, and stuff like FSR4 shows that they're making really big strides, at least being competitive enough to allow people to vote with their wallet at this tier, and that's great for consumers. I have yet to talk to anyone out there that's been super stoked with the way Nvidia has handled the 50 series rollout. Tech-wise, I still feel like Nvidia is the GPU to beat, and AMD is still the underdog, and we love to root for the underdog, but I'd really like to see them be able to compete at the 5080, 5090 tier. In spite of my truly horrible recent release schedule, I promise I've been working very hard behind the scenes. I've got a couple big surprises in the next couple of videos, so definitely stay tuned. That's it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, stay up.